the coming of the Lord. He is trampling out the vintage where the grapes of wrath are stored. He has loosed the faithful lightning of his terrible swift sword. His truth is marching on. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. His truth is marching on. I have seen him in the watchfires of 100 circling camps. They have builded him an altar in the evening dews and damps. I can read his righteous sentence by the dim of flaring lamps. His day is marching on. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. His truth is marching on. In the beauty of the lilies, Christ is born across the sea, with the glory in his bosom that transfigures you and me. Oh, he died to make man holy. Let us live to make man free. Our God is marching on. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. His truth is marching on. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. His truth is marching on.
Good morning, Eagles Nest, and welcome to our online service this morning. We're so glad that you decided to tune in. Hey, we just heard from the Battle Hymn of the Republic, and that'll put us in the right spirit as we get ready to celebrate this Memorial Day. In just a moment, Paul and the worship team are going to lead us in praise and worship, and that will lead us into Pastor Bob's message that he's going to share with us very shortly. But before we do that, I want to remind us here on Memorial Day, as we get ready to look forward to this last Monday in May, which is always the day we commemorate it, just to remember and take a pause for a moment to reflect on all of the American lives, both men and women, that have given their ultimate sacrifice and service to our great country. We say a very heartfelt thank you to you and to all of your family members that you leave behind. We're truly grateful, and we say thanks. Please enjoy this Memorial Day tribute.
Extraordinary men and women went before us with unmatched resilience, enduring hardship when called upon to defend and liberate. They said yes. They found courage to rise with every sun, loyalty toward their country, discipline for every command. Even in the darkest hours, they said yes. They cherished and fought for freedom, so those coming behind them were assured of it. And when the moment came for them to give it all, their futures never to be written, they said yes. Today we think upon their sacrifice and find our way to honor them, saying yes to making the most of what they gave us and filling the earth with God's goodness. We thank them for their yes. They will never be forgotten.
Worthy of every song we could ever sing, worthy of all the praise we could ever bring, worthy of every breath we could ever breathe. We live for you. Jesus, the name above every other name. Jesus, the only one who could ever save. Worthy of every breath we could ever breathe. We live for you. Oh, we live for you. Holy, there is no one like you. There is none beside you. Open up my eyes in wonder and show me who you are, and fill me with your heart and lead me in your love to those around me. Jesus, the name above every other name. Jesus, the only one who could ever save. Worthy of every breath we could ever breathe. We live for you. Oh, we live for you. Holy, there is no one like you. There is none beside you. And open up my eyes in wonder and show me who you are, and fill me with your heart and lead me in your love to those around me. And I will build my life upon your love. It is a firm foundation, and I will put my trust in you alone, and I will not be shaken, and I will build my life upon your love. It is a firm foundation, and I will put my trust in you alone, and I will not be shaken, Lord. Holy, there is no one like you. There is none beside you. Open up my eyes in wonder and show me who you are, and fill me with your heart and lead me in your love to those around me. And I will build my life upon your love. It is a firm foundation, and I will put my trust in you
Good morning, Eagle's Nest, and happy Memorial Day. I'm sure you didn't expect to find things as they are on this Memorial Day. I know I certainly have not. But tomorrow is the day that we as a nation set apart to remember those who have given their lives to preserve our freedom. And I can think of no better way to honor those who have given the ultimate sacrifice than to make sure that we preserve the freedoms that they have given to us. One of those freedoms is the freedom to worship. And this is the reason why we continue to make plans for opening our building for worship. However, the current restrictions imposed by the governor, and let me just say here that we need to pray for our governor. In fact, why don't we do that together? I know how stressful it has been for our team to try to navigate all the issues that the coronavirus has created, and it's got to be difficult for our governor. So please join with me as we pray for him. Father, we pray for our governor that, Father, as he goes about making decisions, that you would bring people around him that can give him good guidance, Father, sensible guidance and science and guidance that's based on science and practical things, but also guidance that will preserve our freedoms and our rights. We ask you to be with him and his team as they go about seeking to help us to be safe as we reopen our society. Father, bless our state, bless our nation, bless our president, bless his team, and Father, bless our country and our world. In Jesus' name, amen. Let me encourage you, continue to pray for our leaders. It's a very difficult thing that they have to do. But with that being said, the current restrictions that have been brought down to us make it practically impossible for us to open in compliance. And by their own admission, these policies were written to discourage churches from opening. Consider the opening paragraph of their guidance for communities of worship. It says, consistent with recommendations from the Governor's Council of Faith-Based Partnerships, communities of worship should continue to offer online telecommunication tools to conduct services or other operations and are discouraged from congregating in person. And so there are policies written in these guidelines like this. No one over the age 65 is allowed to come to worship. No one over 65 is allowed to come to worship. Not only is this an infringement on their First Amendment rights, it's also impossible for us to enforce. Are we supposed to ask everyone their age as they enter the building? My mama taught me better than that. Maybe we should ask everyone their weight as well. And you know how that's going to go. Now, we're also limited to 60 minutes one day a week. Does anybody really believe that preachers will follow this or can follow this? What happens at minute 61? I'm just getting warmed up at minute 61. Does the coronavirus at minute 61 suddenly get released into the air? Will the police show up to arrest us because we violated the law at 61 minutes? And why are we limited to one day a week while restaurants and businesses can open 7 days a week? This is another infringement on our constitutional rights. Now, there are several other policies like this that seem to have no real basis in science, nor is it possible for us to follow when we reopen. And it's for these reasons that several local churches have already decided not to reopen because they can't do so under these restrictions. Now, I'm trying to lighten things up a little bit, and I don't certainly want us to be careful on our spirit and attitude that we have towards our government. And that's why I encourage you to pray for our leaders. It's a very difficult thing that they have to do, to open up the economy and open up society and keep us safe. It's difficult. But because of the restrictions, we don't feel like we're prepared yet to announce when we will open. We have a date in mind, but we feel like we need to meet some more as a leadership team with the board to further discuss the situation and to determine our plan of action. We want to make sure that whatever we do is safe and compliant, but at the same time, we don't want to surrender our constitutional rights. And so this week we'll be meeting with the board to just further discuss this, and I'll have more to say about this next week. But do understand, our priority is your safety. And so we will do everything in our power to reopen safely, but our concern is that the current government approach could give the impression that enacting all these policies will make us safe. No one can guarantee our safety. And every one of us will have to determine our level of risk as we re-engage in worship and how we go about our daily lives. And so be in prayer for us as we consider these things, and certainly be in prayer for our leaders. So we'll have more to say about this next week. So let's get into our message for this week. What do you do when you're confronted by somebody who's really angry? Daniel Goleman, in his book Emotional Intelligence, tells a story about an old friend of his named Terry Dobson. In the 1950s, he was one of the first Americans to ever study the martial art Aikido in Japan. Now, this is central to the story. One afternoon, he was riding home on a suburban Tokyo train when a huge, bellicose, and very drunk and begrimed laborer got on. The man, staggering, began terrorizing passengers. Screaming curses, he took a swing at a woman holding a baby, sending her sprawling into the laps of an elderly couple, who then jumped up and joined a stampede to the other end of the car. The drunk, taking a few other swings, and in his rage missing, grabbed the metal pole in the middle of the car with a roar and tried to tear it out of its socket. At that point, Terry, who was in peak physical condition from daily 8-hour workouts, felt called upon to intervene, lest somebody get seriously hurt. But he recalled the words of his teacher, who said, Aikido is the art of reconciliation. Whoever has the mind to fight has broken connection with the universe. If you try to dominate people, you're already defeated, he said. We study how to resolve conflict, not to start it. Indeed, Terry had agreed upon these things beginning with his lessons, and he agreed never to pick a fight, and to use his martial arts skills only in defense, something Chuck Norris never really learned to do, I might add. Now, at last, he saw his chance to test his abilities in real life, in what was a clearly legitimate opportunity. So as all the other passengers sat frozen in their seats, Terry stood up slowly and with deliberation. Seeing him, the drunk roared, "Aha, foreigner, you need a lesson in Japanese manners," and began gathering himself to take Terry on. But just as the drunk was on the verge of making his move, someone gave an ear-splitting, oddly joyous shout. "Hey!" The shout had the cheery tone of somebody who has suddenly come upon a friend that was from of old. The drunk, surprised, spun around to see a tiny Japanese man, probably in his 70s, sitting there in a kimono. The old man beamed with delight at the drunk and beckoned him with his hand to come over with a light wave. "Come here." The drunk strode over with a belligerent, "Why the should I talk to you?" Meanwhile, Terry, who was ready to fell the drunk in a moment if he made the least of a violent move, got ready to respond. "What you been drinking?" the old man asked, his eyes beaming at the drunken laborer. "I've been drinking sake, and it's none of your business," the drunk bellowed. "Oh, that's wonderful, absolutely wonderful," the old man replied in a warm tone. "You see, I love sake too. Every night, me and my wife, she's 76, you know, we warm up a little bottle of sake and take it out into the garden, and we sit on an old wooden bench and we just have a good drink together." He continued on about the persimmon tree in his backyard and the fortunes of his garden, enjoying the sake and how they enjoyed the sake in the evening. The drunk's face began to soften as he listened to the old man. His fists unclenched. "Yeah, I love persimmons too," he said with a voice trailing off. "Yes," the old man replied in a sprightly voice. "I'm sure you have a wonderful wife." "No," said the laborer. "My wife died." And sobbing, he launched into a sad tale of losing his wife, his home, his job, and of being ashamed of himself. Just then the train came to Terry's stop. And as he was getting off, he turned to hear the old man invite the drunk to join him and tell him all about it, and to see the drunk sprawl along the seat, his head in the old man's lap. That, my friends, is emotional intelligence. Now, if we were on that train, how would we respond? The truth is, whenever we are bugged, annoyed, or confronted with conflict, we really only have one of three ways that we can respond. We can be a peace breaker. Terry Dobson thought about attacking back. That's peace breaking. We can be a peace faker. The people on the train who tried to avoid the man were peace fakers. Getting away from him wasn't going to solve anything. Or we can be a peacemaker. The old man who engaged the drunk wisely was a peacemaker. Being a peace breaker or faker comes natural to all of us. In fact, those are two common responses that we all lean towards in our lives. We're either going to lean towards being a breaker or a faker. Dallas Willard writes that assault and withdrawal are the two essential forms of a relationship sin. Attack or withdrawal. Last week we called it silence or violence. These are practiced by every human being on earth, and they damage every marriage and family and workplace and church, according to Dallas Willard. We assault others, he says, when we act against what is good for them, and we withdraw from someone when we regard their well-being as a matter of indifference to us. So we have to choose. Will we be a peace breaker, peace faker, or peacemaker? We are peace breakers when we attack back. In Genesis chapter 4, verse 23, it speaks of the law of Lamech. Attack says, and it illustrates that attack says, you hurt me, I'll hurt you back just a little bit more. In Genesis 4:23, we read about Lamech. It says, then Lamech said to his wives, Adah and Zilhah, hear my voice, wives of Lamech, listen to my speech. For I have killed a man for wounding me, even a young man for hurting me. If Cain shall be avenged sevenfold, then Lamech 77-fold. Ann Spangler calls this the law of Lamech in her book, Sitting at the Feet of Rabbi Jesus. Lamech was a descendant of Cain, who killed Abel, and he had inherited his forefather's murderous instinct, but who in his shocking lust for revenge outdid even Cain. I have killed a man for wounding me, a young man for injuries. If Cain is avenged 7 times, and Lamech 77 times. You see the escalation there. Attacking back, we may not attack like Lamech, but when we are a peace breaker, when we are put in a situation where anger is expressed towards us, or we're in a difficult situation, it is natural for some people, like myself, to attack back. Attacking back is a form of revenge. It doesn't matter the level. It says, revenge says, you hurt me, I'll hurt you back more. It may be a little bit more or a lot of bit more. We see this in the book of Acts, chapter 8, verse 1. Attack says, I must win, you must lose. We see this in the life of Paul, who was called Saul at the time. Saul is going around persecuting the churches. He thinks he's doing God's bidding. He thinks that the way to beat the Christians is to attack them, that they need to be wiped out. He's attacking back. He's in a conflict. The Christians are preaching their message. Paul doesn't believe their message. Paul is responding by attacking back. This is the Apostle Paul. The Apostle Paul, he becomes the Apostle Paul. The Apostle Paul is one of those guys that if you hit him, he's going to hit you back a little bit harder. Attacking back is an attempt to win the conflict by force and at the expense of the other. In past counseling sessions, I've often had to explain the difference to people between assertiveness and aggression. The two can look the same. Assertiveness is being able to ask for something that you want, or something you want somebody to do less. It's the ability to express yourself and your desires. That's a good thing. Aggressiveness looks just like assertiveness, except for one thing. Aggressiveness is asking for what you want at the expense of somebody else. Assertiveness is a win-win response. I say what I need, you say what you need, we're both heard, we both win. Aggressiveness is I win, you lose. That's what Saul was doing in Acts chapter 7 and 8. He was trying to win the conflict with the Christians by just getting rid of them. He wanted to win at all cost at their expense. It says in Acts 8:1, it says, now Saul was consenting to Stephen's death. And at that time, a great persecution arose against the church, which was at Jerusalem. And they were all scattered throughout the regions of Judea and Samaria, except the apostles. Folks, attacking back is a peace-breaking move. It really doesn't resolve anything. Attacking back, taking revenge, doesn't resolve conflict. It usually escalates it. It usually increases it, because if we're in the middle of a conflict and my response is attack back, and you hit me, guess what? I'm going to hit you a little bit more. And then you're going to respond back, hitting me a little bit more. And it begins to escalate. Consider the example of Croatian Protestant theologian Miroslav Volf. Yes, I said that right, Miroslav Volf. He tells the story of a female survivor of the 1990s war in Yugoslavia. And I have softened this a little bit because it's even more egregious than what I'm going to read, but I felt that we needed to, for the camera's sake, that we needed to be a little bit more careful how this is said. But she says, I am a Muslim and I'm 35 years old. To my second son, I gave the name Jihad, so he would not forget the testament of his mother, revenge. The first time I put my baby at my breast, I told him, may this milk choke you if you forget. So be it. The Serbs taught me to hate, she says. My student Zoran, the only son of my neighbor, abused me, and I don't want to describe the abuse, but it was pretty bad. He abused me as the bearded hooligans standing around laughed, she said. Then she told them, you're good for nothing, you stinking Muslim woman. This is what they said to her. So she names her son Jihad, which means war. This is the only way, she says. What is she doing? She's been hurt. She's been abused. And so her response is to attack back. But folks, that's how we keep wars going. It really doesn't resolve anything. It just escalates the anger. John Ortberg writes, he says, what we see in drive-by shootings and suicide bombings is only the ultimate outworking of anger that's in all of our hearts. We get hurt and we want to hurt back. Little jihads get fought every day between people who work together in the same office, between people who lead small groups in the same church, between husband and wife, and between parent and child. Jihads go back as far as Cain and Abel. For some of it's only natural to be a peacebreaker. When we get hurt, we want to hurt back just a little bit more, but it really doesn't resolve the conflict. Others of us are what are called peace fakers. When we're in a conflict, we want to withdraw. We want to withdraw from the conflict. We want to withdraw from the rupture. We want to avoid. We often think by withdrawing, we can protect ourselves. And sometimes not only can we protect ourselves by withdrawing, we really think that we can punish others. I've seen this over and over again. People withdraw from people thinking by withdrawing themselves and removing themselves, they're actually attacking back. But it's a withdrawal move. Now, when we withdraw, what we do is we hide from the rupture. We hide from the conflict. John Maxwell says that when it comes to speaking the truth or resolving a conflict, there are really three kinds of people. There's hiders, which is what a withdrawer is. There's hurlers, that's the attacker. And then there's healers, which is the peacemaker. This started in the Garden of Eden. In Genesis chapter 3, talking about Adam and Eve, who had just sinned and eaten of the tree that God said not to eat of. The Bible says, so Adam said, I heard, he's talking to God, and as God confronts him, he says, I heard your voice in the garden, and I was afraid because I was naked, and I hid myself. Adam and Eve did wrong. They knew they did wrong. But instead of confessing it to God, they hid themselves. They hid from the rupture in the relationship. They were naked, so they hid behind a fig leaf. They had done wrong, so they hid behind the trees in the garden. And when God really presses them on them, they hide behind blaming the other person. They say, well, it's the woman you gave me. Or it's the serpent. He tempted me, Eve said. The whole idea is that they're hiding. Hiding does not resolve conflict. It simply denies it. It simply kicks the can down the road. This is best illustrated in my grandson, Jason. I love to play hide and go seek with Jason and Lila. And Jason now is old enough, being 4 years of age, that he can hide for himself, and he'll count and he'll recount, and we'll play that game. But often he'll, it's usually at night because we're doing it in the nighttime, and so the rooms are dark with just a little bit of light. So he'll get on top of the bed and he'll hide under the blanket. Now you can see he's like a snake that swallowed, he's like a snake that swallowed a goat. You can see him sticking out everywhere under the blanket, but he's hiding, and he thinks because he's hiding under there that I can't see him. Now I play along, but the reality is when we withdraw from the conflict or the rupture to avoid it, we look a lot like Jason on that bed. We look a lot like a snake that swallowed a goat. It doesn't resolve it, and it's really not disappeared. We just think it's disappeared. When we withdraw, we not only are hiding from the rupture, we actually run sometimes from the rupture. This is illustrated in the life of Jacob. Jacob is one of the main characters we meet in the book of Genesis, and I plan to do a series on Jacob's life later in the year, maybe early next year. But in Genesis 27:43 through 49, we read about Jacob, who had stolen his brother's birthright. He had ruptured the relationship, and he stole his blessing. And the Bible says, "Now therefore, my son," this is his mother speaking to Jacob, because she had overheard Esau, his brother, say that he wanted to kill him. And so his mother, when we look at her, she's kind of a character in this story. She tells her son, "Son, obey my voice. Arise, flee to Uncle Laban's, my brother Laban's." And he's a con artist. We call him Uncle Junior around here. He's in Haran. Flee to him. And boy, when we read his story, it's amazing. And stay with him for a few days. Those few days turned out to be 20 years. And mom never saw her son again. Folks, running from the rupture does not resolve it. Now, there is a time to withdraw, to recompose yourself, to be prepared to deal with things. But as a method of conflict resolution, it really doesn't work. Because running doesn't resolve the conflict, it just delays the problem, kicking it down the road. And so we either deny the conflict in withdrawal, or we delay the conflict. And usually when we delay it, the stakes go up. What Jacob didn't realize, what was in front of him, running from his brother, but he did not realize that what he was facing in front of him was greater than what was behind him. And as I said before, he'll never see his mother again. And what's even more true is that when he is 20 years down the road, he still has to deal with the conflict. He still has to resolve it. He has to face it. And that's the stories recorded for us in the Bible. The rupture is still there. He still had to deal with it. And he still had to deal with all the stress and all the fear, but that's for another sermon. When we withdraw, remember, we have two responses that are natural to us. We attack or we withdraw. When we withdraw, we not only run, we not only delay, we not only hide, but we also build walls. And we think that these walls will protect us from the rupture in the relationship. This is what the nation of Israel did in the first century in the time of Christ. They actually built a wall in the temple called the wall of separation. And this wall was actually in the church. It's like we putting a wall in the church and saying a certain group of people are not allowed to go on the other side of this wall. It's just for us. Now, they thought that building this wall would protect them from contamination, from all bad things that the other people would bring. But instead of protecting them, what it did was it isolated them from each other, from other people, and even from God. It didn't work. And they ended up becoming like the Simon and Garfunkel song says, "I am a rock. I am an island. And a rock feels no pain." Maybe I should sing that. "And a rock feels no pain. And an island never cries." But they don't have any friends either. Walls, hear me, church, walls don't resolve conflict. They simply defend us against those on the outside. Walls keep people out, but they also keep people in. Walls protect us, but they also isolate us. Walls keep us sheltering in place permanently. And the walls that the Jews built in the time of Jesus became the wall of separation. Paul addresses this, that Jesus Christ came to destroy our walls. He came to tear the walls down so that we could be in relationship with one another. And Paul references this wall in Ephesians chapter 2, verse 14, when he says, "For he himself, Jesus, is our peace." That's peace between us and God, and our peace between one another. "Who has made both one, Jew and Gentile." The people that were supposed to be kept out of church. He's saying Jesus has brought them and given them access, and we can go to church together. We can have a relationship with one another, and has broken down the middle wall of separation. When we're in a conflict, when we're on a train and somebody else is spewing anger, we have one or two responses that we all are going to lean towards. I confess to you in public that my go-to is to attack. My nature is if you push on me, I'm going to push back a little bit. I've even been in situations where I've warned people. I said, "Now look, things are getting tense. Please do not put your finger in my chest." Because everything in me wants to put my finger back. And that's what I do. But some of you are withdrawers. Some of you, when conflict erupts, you want to run and avoid and never deal with it. And both of those responses will destroy relationships in the end if that's all we do. And so, whether we're a peace breaker that we attack back, or whether we are a peace faker that we run, we need to make a conscious choice to become peacemakers. A peacemaker is somebody that addresses the rupture and repairs it. As Dallas Willard rightly said, we respond to conflict either by attacking or withdrawing. But there is a third way, I would add to what he says, the way of peacemaking. What does peacemaking look like? And folks, let me just back up here. Today, in the day that I was recording this message, was probably the most stressful day that I've had yet in this last 8 to 10 weeks that we've had dealing with the coronavirus. Trying to reopen for worship has been extremely stressful. It's kept me up at night. I have constantly had to battle bird brain as I make my own judgments about decisions that are being made that I have no control over, which for an attacker and peace breaker, these are tough things to deal with. And so I had to sit in my office today, and I spent about an hour and a half with our leadership team processing the emotions that I feel and the struggle that I'm having of wanting to push back so that I could be a peacemaker instead of a peace breaker. Folks, this is real to all of us. We need to get a hold of this. And I am trying to live out these sermons that I'm preaching to you. If they haven't helped you, they've helped me. We need to choose not to be a peace breaker and attack or a peace faker and just avoid. There are real challenges that are developing because of the different ways that people are approaching the coronavirus. And we need to address the way that we instinctively go when we're in these pressure cookers. I wanted to take the Terry Dobson approach and just begin to engage this. And as I talked this through and we got around it and said, what is important for every one of us in this situation? Because everybody has a perspective. And how do we become peacemakers? This is an opportunity for us. This is an opportunity for the Church of Jesus Christ to rise and illustrate the gospel for people around us. Jesus was a peacemaker. Now, what does peacemaker look like? Well, peacemaking looks like forbearance. Proverbs 19:11 says, "A man's wisdom gives him patience. It is his glory to overlook an offense." Now, honestly, forbearance is learning to put up with other people's junk, to let the ruptures that they create in the relationship, to just let them go unconfronted, to let them just stand. Yes, it bugs us, but we love them more than what bugs us. When Patty stays up to clean the dishes, it used to annoy me. You know, it's bedtime. Everybody needs to go to sleep. But she needed to stay up. That used to bug me in our early days of marriage. But now I don't even think about it because my wife needs the time to decompress and to get the house clean. I could care less. I can leave the dishes in the sink. I can leave the house a mess. There's no skin off my teeth. It doesn't make me not relax. It doesn't hinder my sleep. But as we talked that through in our early days and we did peacemaking on that issue instead of peace breaking, like throwing the dishes and then, or faking it, pretending everything was okay. No, we addressed it. And I saw the error of my way. I saw that what Patty needed was the time to decompress. And so I just now go to bed and go to sleep and we wake up next morning and we talk about it. Forbearance is overlooking the faults or the things that tick us off or bug us. Now, it's not avoidance. Avoidance is different than forbearance. And the difference is this. Forbearance is overlooking something after we've looked at it and said it's just not worth it, or it's not going to accomplish the thing. It's just not that important. Avoidance refuses to deal with what bugs us. It's avoiding the issue. But in forbearance, we make a conscious choice to not let that thing be the center of our relationship. And folks, this is very important because avoidance is withdrawal. It's peace faking. Many times people don't bring things up because they're afraid of the consequences of bringing the conflict up. They're afraid if they engage the conversation, it's going to destroy the relationship. That fear might be based in reality, but if we don't eventually bring that up, that's avoidance, not forbearance. Forbearance means I've looked at it, it's just not that important to me. For instance, I've shared with you before that I have a habit from time to time of leaving my socks on the floor in the living room. I've done it 1,000 times. The last time I did it, And I did it about a month ago. I brought up to Patty the next morning and said, Patty, I really apologize. I left my socks on the floor. She just said, no big deal, you're trying. But truthfully, in this area, I'm sometimes an idiot. I'm trying to do better. But she looked at the relationship. The boy's really trying to do better. But in this area, he's just an idiot, you know? And so she loves me more than me leaving my socks. That's forbearance. I still try to remember to when I take my socks off, to put them in the hamper. Peacemaking looks like forbearance, but peacemaking also looks like forgiveness. Forgiveness, I've said before, is not forgetting. Matthew chapter 5, verses 38 through 39, Jesus deals with forgiveness. Forgiveness is not forgetting. It's simply changing the focus off the rupture and on to the repair. Forgiveness shifts the attention away from the offense, whereas in forbearance just decides to not even deal with the offense. It's not worth it. In forgiveness, the rupture has to be forgiven, but it also has to be confronted. But in forgiveness, not only do we take the focus off the rupture, we choose not to hurt back. We choose not to attack back. There is a choice in forgiveness. There is a choice in forbearance. Forgiveness requires just the opposite of forgetting. It requires that we see what's been done to us. It requires that we feel it fully. In other words, when somebody bugs you, it's not forgiveness and it's not peacemaking to ignore our feelings. This is profoundly wise, and I didn't get this for myself. I read this years ago in a book by Dr. John Townsend. I don't even remember what book it is. I just know it was him who said it, who wrote it. He said that in order to forgive fully, we must feel fully. That is profound. That's why I say we just can't forget what people have done to us, because our emotions are stirred. And in order for us to freely and fully forgive, we have to acknowledge how it's made us feel. Then we make a choice that we will not hurt back, which is what forgiveness is, and that we will focus on the repair of the relationship, not the rupture. Now, when we do that, forgiveness puts us on track to actually start conflict resolution. This is where conflict resolution actually starts. It starts after we have fully felt the impact of what somebody has done. We choose to forgive it. We felt it fully. We forgive it fully. And then we get on track to restore the relationship. Reconciliation is the act and the art and the process of conflict resolution. Forgiveness is the reversal of the law of Lamech. Instead of focusing on what hurt us, instead of focusing on hurting back a little bit more, instead of focusing on revenge, we focus on repairing the relationship, which is what Jesus says in Matthew 5, 38 and 39. He says, you've heard it said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for tooth, but I tell you not to resist an evil person. But whoever slaps you on the right cheek, turn the others to him also. And whoever compels you to go a mile, go with him too. Give to him who asks of you, and from him who wants to borrow money from you, do not turn away. William Barclay, the great commentator, says that this is the oldest law in the world. When he says eye for eye, he says this is the oldest law in the world. It even dates back to the law of Hammurabi, one of the oldest law codes in the world. And it's mentioned in the first 5 books of the Bible, which is called the Pentateuch, or the law of Moses, 3 times. In Exodus chapter 21, 23, in Leviticus chapter 24, verses 19 to 20, in Deuteronomy chapter 19, verse 21. Eye for eye is a standard of justice. It limits hurting back. It limits vengeance. It limits us attacking back. But what Jesus is talking about here is he says, I want you to go a step further. I want you to go the extra mile. Instead of limiting how much you hurt back, instead of just crying out for justice, because that's what eye for eye is. It's a standard of justice. It means if you get robbed 10 sheep, you can't steal another guy's 20 sheep. It's a measure of justice. But he says, I want you to go beyond that. I want you to focus not on the rupture, but on the repair. And then he gives us 4 relevant examples to his culture. If we don't understand the culture behind this statement, it's easy to take that last one. Give to everyone who borrows from you, wants to borrow. Man, we'll all be broke. But in its context, in Jesus' context, it makes sense. He says, when somebody slaps you on the right cheek, turn the left to him. A right-handed cheek in Jesus' day meant an insult. because you have to hit with the back of your hand. It was an insulted slap. It's not somebody getting in your face and punching you. It's when you're insulted. He says, don't focus on the insult. Focus on repairing the relationship. He says, when you're sued for your tunic, which was your inner garment, give your outer garment, which is your cloak as well. In other words, in the Old Testament law, you could not take somebody's cloak. Jesus says, forget about your rights. Focus on the repair, not your rights. Focus on fixing the rupture, not on the rupture itself. He says, when you're compelled to go 1 mile, go 2. Back in Jesus' day, Rome literally could compel a citizen to do anything they wanted them to do. So like even in Matthew 26, Simeon is compelled to carry Jesus' cross. So Jesus says, when they make you carry a cross 1 mile, carry it 2 miles. Don't focus on the compelling. Don't focus on losing your rights. Don't focus on yourself. Focus on fixing the relationship. Become a peacemaker. Using that illustration would have certainly irritated and bugged a lot of people because they knew what Jesus was saying. He was saying, treat the Romans, our oppressors, with forgiveness and grace. That would have been all over the crowd. He says, give to those that ask. Don't hold a grudge. Now, in this context, it needs to be explained. Every 7 years, according to the law of Moses, the people of Israel were supposed to forgive a debt. And so what would happen is people in the 6th year would figure out all kinds of ways not to loan to people because they knew they weren't going to get their money back. Jesus says, don't focus on that stuff. He said, focus on the relationship. Give to him, ask you. In other words, don't count the days until the debt's forgiven. Don't worry about that. Don't worry about getting back what you're going to give. He's not saying here that everybody that asks of you, you have to give to. You will be financially broke within a week. In fact, if that's what you believe, please send me an email with your phone number because I'd like to borrow some money. How about 10 million? Jesus is not saying that. Peacemaking is actually conflict resolution. Conflict resolution means resolving the conflict by addressing the rupture, forgiving the rupture, and addressing and repairing the rupture in the relationship. It's a win-win. Both feel like they equally win, or both, it's a lose-lose. We both feel that we equally sacrifice. So when conflict erupts, we have 2 ways that we naturally resolve it. We either attack as peace breakers, or we withdraw as peace fakers. What comes most natural to you? You know, I've told you my weakness. What's yours? Do you attack or you withdraw? Which is it that you do? Or better put, start taking notice. Because the truth is, we probably do both of these. Start taking notice of when you attack and when you withdraw. And then ask yourself this question, do I need to choose the third way? The answer would be yes. Choose the way of peacemaking. That's what happened on the train. Terry Dobson thought about attacking. He was going to forcefully resolve the conflict. Folks, that rarely works, if ever. The other passengers chose withdrawal, stampeding to the back of the train. But avoiding doesn't resolve the conflict either. There's a time to avoid. You might to protect yourself, but at some point somebody had to address the situation. And that's what the older man chose to do. He chose peacemaking. He engaged the conflict wisely and ended up resolving it. And resolving it, he really did. Now, next week, we will address head-on the issue of reopening. You absolutely don't want to miss it. Now join us as we close in some worship, followed by a few announcements. And may God bless you on this Memorial Day. Be safe. But let's worship together.
give life. You are love. You bring light to the darkness. You give hope. You restore every heart that is broken. And great are you, Lord. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise. We pour out our praise. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise to you only. Great are you, Lord. Give life. You are love. You bring light to the darkness. You give hope. You restore every heart that is broken. And great are you, Lord. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise. We pour out our praise. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise to you only. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise. We pour out our praise. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise to you only. And all the earth will shout your praise. Our hearts will cry. These bones will sing. Great are you, Lord. And all the earth will shout your praise. Our hearts will cry. These bones will sing. Great are you, Lord. And all the earth will shout your praise. Our hearts will cry. These bones will sing. Great are you, Lord. And all the earth will shout your praise. Our hearts will cry. These bones will sing. Great are you, Lord. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise. We pour out our praise. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise to you only. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise. Pour out our praise. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise to you only. Great are you,
Thank you, worship team, and thank you to Pastor Bob for sharing from your heart another very relevant message on how to resolve conflict in a better way. I'm trying to remember all the points. I know it was a peace faker, there was a peacemaker, there might have been a peace taker, being a peace breaker, and a piece of and a peace shaker. You know what? I'm just going to stick to the three practices we have here at Eagle's Nest: worship, connect, and serve. And today I'd like to focus on the word serve, because really, oftentimes we think service is going out into the community and doing good for others, and that is an important aspect of it. But service also sometimes requires us to have a selfless sacrifice of our own will, our own agenda, or our own preferences even, for the sake of someone else. I'd like to thank you all for tuning in today, and especially to those of you that may be tuning in to eaglesnest.ch for the first time. We'd love to hear from you. This past week, we sent out a few t-shirts just to say thanks for folks that are tuning in. If you'll send us a quick note at hello@eaglesnest.ch, we would love to hear your story and how you found us, and give us your feedback on how things went, and there may be a free t-shirt coming your way. You know, I really do appreciate our senior pastor sharing his heart at the beginning and reminding us that he's doing the best he can to lead us through this and not have casualties on both sides of the fence. He really is seeking God and checking his own heart as he leads us. So I would encourage you to continue to pray for us, your leadership, as we seek our board's guidance this week, and as we try and figure out what the best course of action is for all of us here at Eagle's Nest. And now I'd like to remind you that we've been continually using our website, Facebook, even Instagram, and Realm as our main platforms to be able to stay connected with you during this social distancing time. When you go to Realm, you can use that as kind of your central hub here at Eagle's Nest to help you communicate with us, communicate with one another, find out about events and opportunities, and even sign up for them through that platform, as well as there's a giving online platform from Realm. You can also use PushPay if that's your preference as well. If you would like help trying to live out this message or any messages in this conflict resolution series, we would love to have the opportunity to talk with you. You can reach out for pastoral support at hello@eaglesnest.ch, and we will get in touch with you. I would also like to encourage you, if you want to find out more about this Christian faith and what it means, I'd love the opportunity to send you this Max Lucado piece entitled, "He Did This Just for You," and it shares the message of the cross. It explains why the cross has become such a dominant symbol of the Christian faith, and how you can be introduced to a loving God that wants to have a personal relationship with you. If you want to hear that good news, please send us a note. We'll be happy to mail this out to you and share that good news with you. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next week.